How often? This is from favourite exercise again. Sorry, I'm being a bit nepotistic here, if that's the word. How often did you work with US frogmen, and what's your view of them in terms of efficiency, capability, training, selection, and structure?
Right, so that's a long story. I had the pleasure of working quite a lot with, you're talking about Navy SEALs. Great organization, great bunch of blokes. They changed a huge amount in the period I knew them. When I first, militaries and organizations are designed by their conflicts, by their objectives. And so the Navy SEALs went through a huge change from the days when, they were formed. They were the UDT, Underwater Demolition Team, and they were just big, powerful guys. And then you look at, I don't know much about what happened to them during the Vietnam War, but the American concept of operations was completely different from the UK, and it worked for them. So the guys were bigger, more muscular. They did short-term ops generally, so they didn't carry a great deal in the field. And so when we started working together, the SBS and the Navy SEALs, we weren't compatible at all because first of all, we were poor. The Americans were rich, and they had all the great gear. But it was always funny that when the Americans came to work with us, they came with all their gear. When the SBS went to work with the Americans, the word was carry as little as possible so that you can fill your bags with stuff, because they were very generous, the Americans. As far as the structure, so we work completely different. The SBS were very much, and the SAS were very much into long-term ops. You look at the Desert Rats, the SAS in the Second World War. You left camp with your gear, you came back weeks, maybe months later, and that was still a concept. It was very much a British concept of warfare and special forces. You went behind enemy lines, you resupplied, you lived off the land. The American concept was based on their strategy, and so they punched hard, hit hard, didn't reach out so far behind enemy lines with manpower. A lot of standing OPs, etc., ambushes and stuff like that, but then coming back into to the main group. And so that's how they developed. And so when we first started working together, we were very diverse. So the answer to this question is actually quite a long one, and we don't really have the time to go through it. But I really made some great friends in the Navy SEALs. We swapped over. We would send a sergeant and an officer to them for 2 years, and they'd reciprocate. And so we got to know each other quite well. We'd spend quite a bit of time working with them in the States, and they'd come over and freeze their asses off in the UK. We'd dive with them off the coast of Florida, and then we'd take them for a dive off the coast of Scotland or Norway in a storm. They must have thought we were taking the piss, but this is the environment that we had in our backyard, But yeah, great blokes. But it's a huge story in itself, the whole story of the SEALs and the SBS. It's a great one as well, and maybe worth one day someone should put a book together of that story because it was a fun one. But good bunch of lads, and it was lovely to watch them evolve. From my point of view, the only summary I'd like to say is that they ended up evolving in our direction. So I think there's a credit there. Great organisation, but they did see that the way that the Brits conducted warfare was the future. They must have done, because when I started working with them, they were not the same organisation as they were when I finished working with them, and they looked like a hell of a lot more like an SAS and SBS unit than they did when I first started working with them. So there's the clue, if you like, that they ended up, following, if you like, in our sort of basic concept.
What about in terms of equipment? Have they got sort of unlimited budget? Is that noticeable with the gear that they use?
Yeah, that was a great story as well. The Brits have always been broke. Look, when the Navy SEALs couldn't believe that an SBS bloke, if you want to get new set of batteries for your torch, you had to go into the store, and we had a storeman who used to put your battery on a bulb. And if the bulb glowed even a little bit, you couldn't change the battery. Now, if you said that to an American, he'd look at you, a Navy SEAL bloke, and he'd go, we know you're not serious. Because if you were in Norfolk, Virginia, and you wanted a battery, you'd go down to the store and come back with a case of them. They're over there, help yourself. So that was the sort of concept. They were unlimited in lots of the stuff that they had. I mean, we'd get fined or get hammered if we lost a piece of equipment. But I went on an exercise with SEAL Team 4 in Guam, and SEAL Team 4 and 1 were the real poor cousins. The SEAL Team 2 and 6 were the great guys. They were the really great organizations, and they had a different structure. If you joined SEAL Team 4 or 1 in my day, you probably didn't work with 2 or 6. And I went off on an exercise with SEAL Team 4, and when we got to the index after 3 days later, we were walking out to the pickup point about 20 clicks. They dumped all their gear so they wouldn't have to carry it. Sleeping bags, mess tins, rations. So guess who was carrying all that shit when we came back out of the field? All the Brits were just picking this stuff up. And one of the lads, he had about 100 pounds on his back by the time we made it to the pickup boy, one of the Brits. He was picking up everything the Americans. It's just we were different animals. They had everything, and also they had. If we wanted something, we had to make it. My pooches, I stitched up myself in the early days, designed them all myself. We had cell makers. One of your favorite pieces of kit was the cell makers. Americans sitting there looking at me making a pooch, who just thought I was a moron. Why don't you just go down to the store and get one? So the Brits had this concept where if you didn't have it, you made it. But there was something else though going on here. A lot of the stuff that we were coming up with, they weren't on the shelf. If you wanted to come up with an idea of climbing onto a ship back in the 70s, you didn't go down to the climb onto the ship shop and say, can I have the latest equipment you have for climbing onto ships, please? Because there wasn't any place like that. You made it. And the SEALs, because they didn't have that pedigree of having to make stuff because they were rich compared, so they didn't have that concept. So if you couldn't buy it, if there wasn't a company making it, you didn't have it in the SEALs. And this was a unique and interesting relationship that they benefited from and we benefited from. We had this attitude of like, well, we had to make everything we needed. And the Americans had this attitude, well, if we can't buy it, let's get a company to invent it and then we'll buy it off them, It's a bit simplistic, but it's generally how it was, We were poor. We were the poor cousins and they were the rich buggers. Yeah.